The moment my son said, "Today is my wife's birthday," after I told him his father had died, something inside me broke forever. Not like a vase smashing on the ground. Not like lightning or thunder. No, it was quieter than that. It was the kind of break that you can't hear. The kind you feel deep in the lining of your bones. Like a seam in your spirit tearing without sound. He said it so lightly. Like I had called to remind him of an errand. I was standing in my hallway, still holding the phone in one hand and the top button of my cardigan in the other, barely breathing. I had just told him that his father, my husband, was gone. Dead. His heart gave out just before sunrise, right there in that hospital bed on the 4th floor. I watched his chest go still. I held his hand as it cooled, and the first words my son said were, "Today is my wife's birthday." That sentence will stay with me longer than the grief, longer than the loneliness, longer than the funeral. My husband's name was Gerald. He was my first and only love. We met when I was just 19, and he had a way of looking at people that made you feel like you were the only one in the room. We built a life. Not perfect, but real. He was quiet, steady, a man who repaired things before they ever looked broken. He made coffee every morning before I opened my eyes. He knew the way I liked the bedsheets folded down at night. He loved his son. More than anything. More than I can describe in words. We gave that boy everything we could. We gave him a childhood filled with warm meals, open arms, school trips, late-night pickups, second chances. Gerald worked overtime for his baseball tournaments. I skipped my own doctor's appointments to get him to therapy after his first heartbreak. And now, standing in my hallway, phone pressed to my ear, hearing that shallow sentence from my grown son. "Today is my wife's birthday," I felt like a stranger in my own life. Gerald passed just after 3:10 a.m. The nurse said he went peacefully. I was there, sitting beside him in the dark, holding his hand, tracing the lines of it with my thumb like I'd done 1,000 times before. He exhaled, and didn't breathe in again. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there, staring at the small crack in the ceiling tile above his bed, listening to the quiet, waiting for it to feel real. When I finally walked out of that hospital, I knew what I had to do first. I had to call our son. I scrolled through my phone and pressed his name. It rang 4 times. Then he picked up. There was noise in the background. Glasses clinking. Music. Laughter. "Mom? What's up?" he asked. I took a breath, tried to keep my voice calm. I said, "Honey, your father passed away this morning." There was a pause. A long one? No. Just a beat. Enough for me to think he might be processing. That maybe he was about to ask when, or how, or if I was okay. Instead he replied, "Oh, well, today's my wife's birthday." That was it. Not a question. Not even an awkward silence. Just those words. I stood there, phone still at my ear, blinking into the hallway. My eyes fell on a picture frame on the wall. Gerald holding our son in his arms, both smiling like the world hadn't yet bruised them. And I realized something I never wanted to believe. My husband was gone. And maybe, just maybe, so was our son. I didn't call him back after that. I didn't text. I didn't remind him about the funeral, or ask if he needed the address. I sat in Gerald's armchair. I watched the sun come up. I listened to the silence settle into the house like dust. And I stayed there, until it started to feel like a new kind of normal. The kind where people you love stop showing up when it matters most. The kind where birthdays matter more than burials. The kind where silence says more than any word ever could. Have you ever trusted someone, and they broke you just like that? If this story is hitting close to home, tap the like button, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done in my shoes? Let's talk about it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers in my clothes, staring at the ceiling with my hands crossed over my chest like I was the one being buried. When morning came, I boiled water for tea, poured it, and let it sit untouched on the counter. Then I opened my notebook, the one I used for grocery lists and birthdays, and began planning my husband's funeral. Alone. I wrote out the order of service. I called the church we used to attend before his health declined. I made a list of names, people to notify, people who might care enough to come. Every few minutes, I glanced at my phone. I wasn't expecting an apology, but part of me thought maybe, just maybe, our son would call back. Maybe he'd say he spoke in shock, or that he and his wife were catching a flight. But the phone stayed quiet. Planning a funeral is a strange thing. You spend hours trying to make something beautiful out of something unbearable. Picking out flowers you know he'll never smell. Choosing a suit for a man who can no longer wear it. I chose the blue one. The one he wore to our 40th wedding anniversary. He looked so proud in it that night. Gerald didn't want a big funeral. He once told me, "Don't spend too much on saying goodbye. I'd rather we use that money on something that breathes." So I kept it simple. A small chapel. Soft hymns. I called my niece Abby. She lived 2 towns over. She cried when I told her. She offered to come immediately, but I told her to wait for the service. A few days later, we gathered. Not a crowd, just a handful. Abby came, holding my hand the whole time like I was made of glass. My cousin Helen came, even though we hadn't seen each other in 5 years. Mr. Parker from next door was there, wearing a tie I'd never seen him wear. But my son? No. His wife? Not even a card. I sat on the front pew, staring at the closed casket, feeling the weight of every empty chair behind me. The pastor asked if anyone wanted to say a few words. I stood slowly. My voice didn't shake. I told them Gerald loved crossword puzzles and hated cold toast. That he always wore mismatched socks when he was nervous. That he cried when our son was born, and again when he left for college. I didn't mention that our son was missing from the room, but others did. After the service, while we stood beneath the oaks in the small cemetery, people whispered, "Where's Michael? He's not here." I thought he was flying in. Some didn't even whisper. One woman, an old church member who used to knit with me, looked right at me and said, "I'm sorry, but how could your own son not show up?" I smiled. A tight, hollow smile. I wanted to scream. I wanted to defend him. I wanted to say it must have been an emergency, or the flights were canceled. But the truth sat heavy in my throat like gravel. He simply chose not to come. After the burial, people left in pairs. They hugged me. They said things like, "He's in a better place," or, "Call me if you need anything." But the driveway was empty by sunset. I walked back inside. The house was painfully still. I took off my shoes and sat on the couch. A single condolence card lay on the table. From Abby. Picked it up. Inside she had written, "Uncle Gerald was the definition of loyalty. I hope you know you were his world." I read it over and over again until the words blurred. I looked at my phone one last time. Still no message. Just an old voicemail from 2 weeks ago. Michael asking if I could send over Dad's insurance paperwork for future reference. I didn't cry that night either. I just sat in the dark, listening to the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. It used to annoy Gerald, the ticking. He once said, "It sounds like it's counting down." And now it felt like it had. It had counted down to this, a quiet house, a forgotten funeral, a mother with no one left to explain herself to. The worst part wasn't the grief. It was the humiliation. Not just losing him, but watching the world find out that even my own son couldn't be bothered to show up. People don't just change overnight. That's what I used to tell myself. That maybe he was just tired. Maybe life had gotten too loud. Maybe the pressure of being a husband, a father, a provider had worn him down. But now, sitting here with nothing but time and silence, I realize the signs were always there. They were small like hairline cracks in a porcelain cup. Hard to see at first. Easy to dismiss. Like the first time he brought her home. Rachel. That was her name. She was beautiful in the kind of way magazines try to capture. Polished. Put together. She had a quiet way of making everything feel like a performance. She smiled a lot, but it never reached her eyes. I remember making dinner that night. Roast chicken, cornbread, mashed potatoes, Gerald's favorite. I brought the plates out and she looked at me, then glanced at my son and said, "You still eat like this? That's so heavy." I laughed. Polite one. Brushed it off like a mosquito bite. But Gerald didn't laugh. He caught my eye and raised one eyebrow the way he always did when something didn't sit right. That was the first time. Then came the second. It was Thanksgiving. I set the table with the same china I'd used every year since Michael was 12. Rachel walked in, looked at the setting and said, "Oh wow, this is traditional." Not a compliment. Not exactly an insult. Just a dismissal. I told myself it was nothing. That maybe she didn't mean it the way it sounded. That maybe I was being sensitive. But Gerald? That night after they left, he sat on the edge of our bed and said, "She doesn't like being here." I asked him what he meant. He shook his head slowly and said, "She looks at you like you're a burden, like everything you offer is outdated." I told him he was reading too much into it, that Rachel was just adjusting. But he didn't answer. He just sighed and turned off the light. Over time, Michael stopped visiting as much. First it was once a week, then once a month. Eventually it became birthdays and Christmas, if that. The calls grew shorter. Sometimes he'd call and talk about traffic, work stress, baby milestones. And just when I'd start to feel like we were connecting, I'd hear her voice in the background and suddenly he had to go. I kept adjusting my expectations like furniture, making room for disappointment in every corner of our relationship. Gerald noticed. He always noticed. He stopped asking, "Have you heard from Michael?" And instead started saying, "We raised him right, didn't we?" Like he needed me to reassure him. But I didn't know how to answer anymore. There was this one day. I'll never forget it. It was my birthday. Gerald had baked a cake, yellow with chocolate frosting. He wasn't much of a baker, but he tried. I was sitting at the table, a slice in front of me, and the phone rang. It was Michael. I lit up inside. I answered and he said, "Hey Mom, just calling to say happy birthday. I've only got a minute, we're headed out with some friends." I told him I understood. I told him to enjoy his night. But when I hung up, I sat there staring at my plate. Gerald placed his hand on mine and said, "He doesn't mean to hurt you." And I remember replying, "Maybe not. But he still does." I never wanted to be the kind of mother who competed with a daughter-in-law. I didn't want to be possessive or overbearing or in the way. So I swallowed every ache, every sideways comment, every canceled visit. I smiled when Rachel posted photos online of holidays we were never invited to. I liked them, left polite comments. I told myself this is just how things are now. I bit my tongue when she sent back a Christmas gift unopened because it wasn't their taste. I stayed quiet when Michael forgot my anniversary, even though I'd sent them one for theirs just 2 weeks before. Gerald didn't stay as quiet. One night, not long before he passed, he looked at me from his armchair, breathing heavier than usual, and said, "You know, I don't think she likes you." I looked up from my knitting and said, "It's fine. She doesn't have to." But he shook his head. "No, it's not fine. She doesn't want him to need you. And he's letting her win." I didn't answer. I just nodded and kept stitching. Because what was I supposed to do? Demand my place back? Force him to remember who rocked him to sleep every night for 2 years straight when he had night terrors? Remind him that Gerald once worked 3 jobs to keep him in college after he lost his scholarship? No. If love has to be reminded, then it's not love anymore. So I let it go. One visit at a time, one unanswered text at a time, until eventually, all I had left were flashbacks. Flashbacks of a little boy in dinosaur pajamas climbing into our bed at 5 a.m. Flashbacks of a teenager who cried when he got accepted to his dream school. Flashbacks of a grown man walking down the aisle with tears in his eyes and Rachel on his arm. I held on to all of it, but I held it alone. And now with Gerald gone, I've stopped wondering why Michael changed. The better question is, why did I keep forgiving it for so long? We gave him everything. I don't say that with pride. I say it with the quiet kind of regret only a mother can understand. We gave him everything and never once kept score. I remember the day Gerald walked into the kitchen with his shoulders heavy. Michael had just called. He'd gotten into that private college in Pennsylvania, the one with the beautiful ivy-covered walls and the tuition that could buy a house. We didn't have it. Gerald worked maintenance at the high school. I was running a daycare out of our living room. We had just finished paying off the roof repair, and there was barely enough left each month for anything extra. But Michael was so happy, so proud. And Gerald said, "We'll figure it out. He deserves this." 2 weeks later, we sold the acre of land we'd inherited from his father. That land was supposed to be for our retirement, a place to build a little cabin when we were too tired for the city. But we let it go. Michael never asked how we managed it. And we never told him. Because that's what you do when you love your child. You lift them higher, even if it means lowering yourself. During college, we sent care packages, cookies, socks, gas money. I once stayed up until 3 a.m. retyping an essay he lost because his laptop crashed. I never told him I had work the next morning. I just did it. When he graduated, I cried harder than he did. Gerald hugged him and whispered, "We're proud of you, son." Michael never saw how long Gerald stood in the parking lot after he walked away, just staring after him. Then came the engagement. Rachel was polite at first, just distant. When they announced the wedding, Gerald and I sat down to go over our savings. We had been planning a long overdue trip. Something simple, just the two of us. I wanted to see the Grand Canyon. Gerald wanted to ride a train across the country, but we quietly shelved that dream. Michael called one night and said, "We're a little short for the venue deposit. Any chance you can help?" Gerald didn't hesitate. He said, "Tell me how much." We wrote the check. A month later, Rachel's parents threw a bridal brunch. We weren't invited. I told myself it was an oversight. The wedding was beautiful, expensive, elegant. Michael and Rachel stood beneath a canopy of white roses, saying vows about forever. Gerald and I watched from the second row. I caught him wiping his eyes more than once, and when they danced I leaned over and said, "We did good." He smiled. He never told me he was worried, but he was. That night in bed he said, "I hope she loves him for who he really is, not just for what he can do for her." I said, "He's a grown man. He'll figure it out." I wanted to believe that. Then came the house. Michael called one afternoon and said, "There's a place we love, but we're short on the down payment." We had just finished paying off our mortgage. But once again we reached for the checkbook. Gerald told him, "It's a gift. You don't owe us anything. Just build a good life." I still remember Rachel's thank you text. One line, "Thanks for helping with the house." I stared at it for a long time. I thought about sending something back. But what was there to say? From then on, our role in their life was defined by usefulness. Can you watch the baby next weekend? Can you swing by and drop off the papers? Can you hold on to this package until we're back from vacation? And we always said yes. Even when we were tired. Even when our backs ached. Even when we were left sitting on the porch waiting for hours because plans had changed and no one thought to tell us. Gerald started saying less and less. He'd watch Rachel talk over Michael at the dinner table. Watch Michael reach for his phone instead of answering a question. I once told Michael we missed him. That the house felt quiet. He laughed and said, "Mom, that's just empty nest syndrome. You're fine." I remember standing in the kitchen after that call, drying my hands on a towel that still smelled like lavender, and wondering when exactly we'd become background noise in his life. Gerald didn't like to admit it out loud, but I could see it wore on him. He stopped calling Michael first. He said, "Let him call when he needs us. That seems to be the only time he remembers we exist." And he was right, because love to some people is a tool. They pick it up when they need something, and when they're done they set it back down. I used to think if we just gave a little more, they'd come around. If we stayed quiet, flexible, agreeable, they'd one day look up and say, "Thank you for always being there." But that thank you never came. Instead, we just became a place they sent their needs. And now with Gerald gone, I keep wondering, what were we actually giving to? Love? Or a version of obligation dressed up as affection? Because giving, when it's never returned, doesn't feel like love. It feels like erasure. There's a voicemail I've never played for anyone. Not Abby. Not Helen. Not even the pastor who asked me if I wanted to include any recordings in Gerald's memorial service. Kept it, locked in my phone in a folder called Voice Notes, as if it were just another grocery list or shopping reminder. But it's not. It's Gerald's voice. The last one he left me. It came exactly 1 week before he passed. I remember that day. I had gone to the pharmacy to pick up his medication, and when I got home I saw the missed call. Gerald wasn't much for voicemail. If he missed me, he'd usually just call back or send a text that said, "Where'd you disappear to?" But this time there was a message. I tapped play expecting something small. Maybe a reminder about dinner. Maybe something he wanted from the store. But instead, it was his voice, calm but slow, like he had practiced what he wanted to say. like he knew I would need to hear it more than once. He said, "Hey, sweetheart. I know you're probably out, but I just wanted to say something while I had the breath for it. I don't want to say it face to face, it'll make you cry, and then I'll cry and we won't get anywhere. Listen, if he doesn't come when I'm gone, if he chooses not to, promise me you'll let go. Promise me you won't chase after what he should have brought to you. Don't beg. Don't wait. Don't spend your days wondering what you did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You were a damn good M." I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there, listening to the silence that came after Gerald's voice faded away, like it was giving me space to absorb it, like the air itself was waiting. I didn't tell anyone I had that voicemail. I didn't bring it up during the funeral. I didn't play it when people said kind things about family and togetherness, because that message wasn't for them. It was for me. And as the days passed after Gerald's burial, it played in my head more and more. If he doesn't come, promise me you'll let go. I wanted so badly to believe that maybe Michael was just processing. That grief made him slow. That Rachel had something planned and he couldn't get away. But then came the text. Short, cold, void of even the simplest warmth. "Hope you're okay. We'll visit after her birthday." That was all. "No, I'm sorry I missed the funeral." "No, how are you holding up?" "No, Dad would have wanted me there." Just a sentence. Just an excuse wearing polite clothing. I stared at that message for a long time. I remember thinking she has a birthday every year. Gerald only died once. But I didn't respond. I thought maybe if I stayed silent, if I gave him time, he'd come. That was 2 weeks ago. The visit never came. No knock at the door. No headlights in the driveway. No questions. Nothing. I watched the calendar shift days like leaves falling from a tree, one by one. And every night I played that voicemail like a prayer. Sometimes I would just sit at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to eat breakfast as a family, and I would let Gerald's voice fill the room. "You were a damn good mother. Better than he probably deserved." The first time he said it, I flinched. The 10th time, I believed it. And the 50th time, something inside me began to change. It wasn't anger. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. I had spent so many years giving my time, my love, my forgiveness to someone who offered me crumbs in return, and I had convinced myself that mothers were supposed to do that. That love meant patience. That boundaries were selfish. But Gerald knew the truth. Love is not meant to be a one-way street paved only by the tired hands of one parent. And death has a strange way of putting things in order. It removes the cushion, the excuse, the illusion. What remains is the truth. My husband died, and my son chose not to show up. I didn't need more proof, and I didn't need another message. Gerald had already given me the only one that mattered. If he doesn't come when I'm gone, promise me you'll let go. I didn't know how yet, but I knew. I would keep that promise. The day I walked into Mr. Halpern's office, it was raining. A slow, steady kind of rain, the kind that didn't rush, didn't crash, just fell. I wore Gerald's old trench coat, the one he used to hang by the door. It still smelled faintly like cedar and the cologne he wore on Sundays. Halpern had been our family lawyer for nearly 30 years. He was the one who handled the paperwork when we bought our first home. The one who helped Michael get his first car loan. The one who watched us grow old from across a polished mahogany desk. He looked up when I entered. "Well, if it isn't the strongest woman I know," he said gently. I smiled. It was a soft smile, the kind that holds more history than words. He walked me to the chair, offered me coffee. I declined. We talked a bit about Gerald, the service, how things were settling. He asked about Michael. I paused, then said, "He didn't come." Halpern blinked. His face didn't move much, but something behind his eyes shifted. He knew what that meant. I pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my purse. "I need to change the will." He took it from me with care, like it was heavier than it looked. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. I nodded. "This isn't out of hatred," I said. "Then why?" I looked at the framed photo on his shelf. Me, Gerald, and a much younger Michael, taken years ago on the courthouse steps after we signed our first will. I said, "Because dignity has to start somewhere. And if I won't protect my own name, who will?" Halpern didn't ask any more questions. He just sat back and listened as I laid it all out. I told him I wanted Michael removed. Entirely. Not a dollar. Not a photo. Not a clause. I told him I wanted our assets, what was left of the savings, the house, the insurance policy, to go to someone who had actually shown up. And I knew exactly who that would be. Her name was Linda. She lived 3 houses down. She wasn't family. She didn't know me anything. But after Gerald died, she came by every other day. Brought soup. Checked on the garden. Sat with me while I cried. She never asked for anything in return. When I told her Michael hadn't come, she just hugged me. Tight. Just presence. And that meant more than anything blood ever promised. The rest? I wanted a portion to go to the small veterans charity Gerald used to donate to every Christmas. Quietly, anonymously. Halpern listened. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. When I was done, he said, "He'll be shocked." I said, "Good. He may contest it." I said, "Then he'll have to look a judge in the eye and explain why he wasn't at his father's funeral." Silence. Then the pen moved. Halpern drafted it in silence. I watched him scratch out Michael's name from the original draft. The same name I had once whispered with joy in a delivery room, prayed over every night, clung to like a second heartbeat. But this time I let it go. He handed me the revised draft. I read every word. And when I reached the signature line, I didn't hesitate. My name. My hand. My decision. I signed it. I stood up, adjusted my coat, and walked to the door. Before I stepped out, Halpern said, "For what it's worth, Gerald would be proud." I looked back just once. He asked me to let go, I said. This is me doing it. If you've ever stayed silent when your heart was on fire, you know exactly what I felt. Click subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because the revenge I chose next? It's not what anyone expected, and I'm not done telling these stories. The letter went out on a Wednesday. Halpern said it would reach him by Friday. I didn't wait by the phone. I didn't hold my breath. I just folded laundry, watered my plants, sat with the quiet like it was a friend I'd finally stopped resenting. Friday came, and just after 8 p.m. my phone lit up. Michael. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up. His voice was sharp, not panicked but cracking at the edges. "Mom, what is this?" I didn't answer right away. He said again, louder this time, "What the hell is this letter? From your lawyer? Are you serious right now?" I said very calmly, "I'm serious, Michael. I've never been more serious." Silence. Then a bitter laugh. "You're cutting me out of the will? You're leaving everything to a neighbor." I closed my eyes and said, "I'm leaving it to someone who showed up when it mattered." He went quiet again. Then he exploded. "How could you do this to me?" And I let that hang in the air. Just like that. Because sometimes people need to hear the echo of their own question before they understand its weight. I leaned back in my chair and said, "How could you smile while I buried your father?" That stopped him. You know when someone is still on the line, but they've stopped breathing through their mouth? That was the sound I heard. I said it again slowly. "How could you smile? On the day I told you your father was gone. How could you say, 'Today is my wife's birthday,' as if that erased the fact that the man who raised you, worked his fingers raw for you, was lying cold in the next room." He mumbled something. "I didn't mean it like that, Mom, you're twisting things." "You don't understand, Rachel." I interrupted him. "No. Don't bring her into this. This isn't about Rachel anymore. This is about you. You chose to not come. You chose silence. And now you're angry that consequences followed your choices." He was stumbling over his words now. "But it's not fair. Dad would have never wanted this." I took a deep breath. And then I said, "Your father left me a voicemail. A week before he died. He said, 'If he doesn't come, promise me you'll let go.'" There was a long pause. The kind that wraps around the ribs and squeezes. Then very quietly, "You don't mean this," I said. "Michael, for 34 years I showed up. For every scraped knee, every missed curfew, every test, every heartbreak. Your father and I gave until there was nothing left but our own silence. And in the one moment I needed you to say, 'I'm here,' you told me someone else's birthday mattered more. So no, this isn't punishment. This is peace. Mine." He didn't yell after that. He just whispered, "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." And I replied, "That's because you never thought I'd choose myself." He hung up, just the hollow click of a man who finally realized that the well had dried. I sat there staring at the empty screen, not out of victory, not out of triumph, but because it finally felt still. Not cold, not cruel, just still. And I knew right then, that was the first boundary I had ever built. Not from anger, not from revenge, but from love. For myself, for the years I had left, for the woman who deserved to be more than a quiet afterthought in the life she helped build. The letter did what letters always do. It moved, from mailbox to mouths that couldn't stay shut. Within a week I started getting calls. First it was Helen from my cousin's side. She said, "I heard what you did. Lord, are you okay?" I said, "Yes, I'm okay." She paused. "I mean, it's just shocking, that's all. You've always been so forgiving." I smiled even though she couldn't see me. "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, Helen." She didn't know how to answer that. Then it was my neighbor Marcy's sister. She came up to me at the store, leaned in like we were sharing state secrets, and whispered, "I think it's brave, what you did. Most women would have just swallowed it." I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure if it was bravery, or just finally being too tired to keep swallowing stones. The backlash came in different shapes. A few snide comments from family. Gerald's brother called and said, "You're going to break that boy's heart." I wanted to ask where that heart was when his father was being lowered into the ground. But I didn't. I just said, maybe he should have protected it better. Then came the flowers. A box arrived on a Tuesday. White lilies. A neat little card in Rachel's handwriting. "Thinking of you. Let's reconnect soon." I didn't call. 2 days later, another delivery. Chocolate. Spa voucher. Then a long text message that started with, "I know we haven't been perfect," and ended with, "We should all move on from this, for the sake of the family." No mention of what was done. No mention of Gerald. Just this. As if betrayal were a piece of bad weather we could all just dry off from. I didn't respond, and in that silence something healed. I realized I had lived too many years apologizing for other people's choices, filling in their gaps with my patience. No more. I started taking morning walks again. Same route Gerald and I used to stroll right before dinner. And I'd always end at the garden, the community one by the park, where Gerald's favorite bench sat under the oak tree. He used to bring a thermos of coffee and sit there while I read. I'd tease him for always choosing the same spot. He'd say, "It's not the bench. It's the stillness it offers." I didn't understand that then. But now? I do. I sit there now. No phone. Just the rustle of leaves, the chirp of early birds, and the slow reminder that peace doesn't scream when it returns. Tiptoes in. It lays its head in your lap and waits for you to notice. The same way Gerald once waited for me to look up from my book and catch him smiling at nothing. Some days I talk to him. Not out loud. Just in my thoughts. I tell him about the letter, the calls, the gifts, and I imagine him shaking his head and saying, "You finally did it, didn't you?" And I whisper back, "Yes, I finally chose me." I know there are people who think I was cruel, that I should have forgiven and forgotten, that a mother's love should be unconditional, even in absence. But I've learned something. Unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional access. And forgiveness isn't a revolving door people get to walk through, just because they know where it's kept. My son made a choice. And so did I. For the first time in my life, I chose the woman who buried her husband alone. I chose the woman who dried her tears in an empty living room. I chose the woman who spent decades giving, and finally decided to keep something for herself. And for that, I have no regrets. It was a Thursday. I remember because I had just come back from the grocery store. The sky was overcast, but the kind that made the trees look deeper in color, like nature had exhaled after holding its breath. I had just put the eggs away when I heard a knock at the door. Not the light tap of a neighbor or the polite ring of a delivery man. It was a full knock. Steady. Uncertain. I wiped my hands on a towel, peeked through the window, and there he was. Michael. Standing on the porch. Just his hands in his pockets, eyes swollen like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't rush. I opened the door the way you open a book you've already read, knowing what's inside might still hurt. He looked at me like a boy again, not the man with a house and a job and a wife, But the child who used to come home from school with scraped knees and shaky confessions. But I didn't hug him. I didn't say his name. I just stepped aside. He walked in like someone stepping into a church they hadn't visited in years. Slow. Careful. Like he wasn't sure if he still belonged. He stood in the living room, looked around, took it all in. The photos. The quiet. And then he cried. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just tears that came from somewhere deep. The kind that don't ask permission. He sat down, put his head in his hands and said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't move. I sat across from him. Not beside. Not in reach. Just across. He looked up, his voice cracking. I was wrong. I messed up so bad. I thought I had time. I thought you'd understand. I said nothing. Just let the silence stretch between us like a road he had to walk on his own. He tried again. Rachel said it was okay to wait. That we'd come after her birthday. I didn't think it would hurt you this much. I looked at him then. Really looked. His hair thinner than I remembered. His face older, drawn with regret. And I said, "The day your father died, I called you. Not the neighbor. Not a cousin. Not even my best friend. I called you. My son." His lip trembled. I went on. "And you said, 'Today is my wife's birthday.'" He looked away. I kept going. "You showed me who you were when it mattered most." The room went still. Not because it was over, but because there was nothing left to say. He wiped his face. Nodded slowly. Stood up like someone carrying something heavy. And without asking for anything, without trying to fix it, he walked to the door. Opened it. And stepped out into the same silence he came in with. I closed the door behind him. Locked it. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. You see, when someone breaks your heart, the pieces don't go back together the same way. Some stay missing. Some become walls. Others turn into doors you no longer leave open for just anyone. That day, I realized forgiveness doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like silence. And strength looks like watching someone leave and not following them. Strength doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wears a cardigan. Sometimes it pours a second cup of tea in an empty kitchen and drinks it anyway. Sometimes strength is just staying quiet when every part of you wants to scream. There was a time I thought strength meant holding a family together at all costs. That being a mother meant sacrificing your needs for their comfort over and over again. But I know better now. Strength is not shouting over silence. Sitting with it. Living inside it until it no longer feels like loneliness, just space you earned. My days look different now. I wake up when I want to. I eat what I like. I light candles even when no one is visiting. I don't check my phone for apologies. I don't chase closure like it's a prize I haven't earned. The legacy I'm leaving isn't wealth. It's this: that a woman can lose everything she once built her life around and still not fall apart. That she can bury a husband, confront a son, be called cold, and somehow find warmth again. Not from others. From herself. Some days I still visit the garden. Gerald's bench is exactly how he left it. There's moss growing on one side. The oak tree casts a wide shadow now. And when the breeze hits just right, I swear I can hear him humming that old jazz tune he used to play while fixing the porch light. So I bring my little speaker now. I sit there. And I play that song. His favorite. I don't cry anymore when it plays. I just listen. And breathe. Not because everything is fixed. Not because all the pain is gone. But because I made peace with the fact that I cannot go back. And I no longer want to. I want to sit in the life I have now. Not the one I waited for someone else to preserve. I don't hate my son. I simply let go of the version of him I was waiting to return. And in that release, I found myself. They said I was too old, too tired, too quiet. But they forgot something. I remember everything. And I'll carry the parts that mattered. All the way home. They thought I was too old, too tired, too quiet. But they forgot. I remember everything. If you made it this far, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't leave without hitting that subscribe button. This isn't just my story, it's ours. And the next one? It's even deeper.